Oh, it's going to be like this, is it?
Oh.
It's going to be really slow. This could be a problem.
Do we have to restart?
Let's see if this... All right. Well, after that inauspicious start, welcome to episode 218 of the Legion of Reason Diversion, podcasting a critical eye on a sometimes less than critical world. We have with us today a guest. Again, last night we went on a marathon for almost 3 hours. And tonight we have with us Kristine Kruszelnicki, or not Nikki. I keep wanting to say ski. I mean, it's
no, actually you're right. It's Kruszelnicki.
It is Niski. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's good.
Well done.
Kruszelnicki.
There we go. Polish is impeccable.
Well, that's the thing. I have a strong Polish background. Well, no, I mean, my family's got a strong Polish background. I don't. It's all the all the skis, or Zaluski is our family name, but yeah. So that anyway, you're an atheist and you're also pro-life, and tonight you're going to present your case for the pro-life movement from a secular point of view.
Correct.
Right. And
would you like me to start, or did you want to have?
Well, sure. Yeah, and then we'll
question?
set what the boundaries are, where you kind of what under what situations would you, if you would allow that for abortion sort of thing. So I'll go that way. Anyway,
sure.
Go ahead. Sure.
All right. So yeah, I'm pro-life because I believe that every human being deserves the right to live, and that includes those who are younger than us, the preborn. And I believe that the evidence shows, the biological evidence is that every human being begins his or her development at fertilization. And so therefore, if we're going to have such concepts as equal rights and human rights, then all human beings, all members of the human species, should have those human rights, one of the basic of which is the basic right to live.
Okay.
So do you have a boundary, like say the mother's life is in danger or something like that, or the child is not going to be born without a brain? Like if the child is going to be born without a brain?
Right.
Well, yeah. Suffer a short life or not ever have quality of life?
Sure. If the child's going to be born without a brain, then they're going to be born dead, effectively. And so at that point, it's like any other human being. When they're dead, we mourn them, we bury them. So that's not so much what we're talking about when we're talking about abortion. If it's a case of the woman's life being in jeopardy, the pro-life community, by and large, I believe that the vast majority of pro-lifers would agree with this, that the goal is to save as many lives as we can. And so if the woman's life is in jeopardy and there's no other way to save her life other than to terminate that pregnancy, then the moral thing to do would not be to force her to remain pregnant when that's going to kill her and quite possibly lose 2 lives. The goal would be then to save as many lives as possible, so to save her life, even if in doing so the preborn child's life is lost.
Yeah, I had a bit of tough time when it came to, like, if you had like hardly any kids and you're married, like say you only have 1 child and you're married. Mm-hmm. I don't think I could personally have an abortion, like for me, because I love kids, and unless the child was going to be have a low quality or no quality of life, or I couldn't fathom doing that myself. Maybe if I had 5 or 6 kids and somebody couldn't afford it, but I don't think I could consider it if I only had 1 or 2 kids.
Right. And I think the question of quality of life is an interesting one too, because who are those of us who are, perhaps in a better quality of life to say that someone else's life isn't worth living?
If they're in severe pain.
I know.
Yeah.
Like, it would be as if they were like attached to a machine their entire life and would never, and only had a brain stem. Like, there's a lot of lines Like, and that's where I, with a background in biology, would draw my own line as a parent. That's why most of the time I step out of the argument, say it's up to the woman and her doctor, the woman and her husband. Like, it's such a personal thing. So I don't tend to, I definitely say I'm pro-choice. I'm not pro or anti-choice. Like, the language we often use then is not pro-abortion or pro-life. We often say pro-choice.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's important too to qualify that when we're talking about these cases and establishing the far boundaries, like these are the most extreme cases, and we're talking like very small minorities of numbers where it would be a severely disabled child or a woman's life in jeopardy. So it is important to talk about these extreme limits, but we also have to kind of know that we're talking about the margins at this point. But yeah, if there is somebody who's suffering, the real question is, how do we treat human beings when they're suffering? There are people who are born, who have been living for 18, 20 years, who get into major car accidents, who are in very similar situations where they're suffering, they're in a lot of pain, and what do we do then? We give them pain medication, we try to rehabilitate them or make them able to function as well as possible. And so I would argue that even in a situation like that, unless the person themselves has said, I do not want to live, then I don't think it's up to any of us to say, well, your life isn't worth living because you're going to be living with pain or suffering.
But you're okay if they give permission to end their lives, given certain conditions. Okay, yeah.
When it comes to euthanasia, and I know this is a bit of a where a lot of pro-lifers and I kind of disagree. I have boundaries when it comes to my belief in euthanasia. I think euthanasia, I'm very worried about it ever becoming a case of somebody saying, I'm going to end your life because you're suffering. I don't think we ever have that opportunity. I think unless someone has said themselves that they want to end their life, then we don't have that right. But I do sympathize that there are situations where people just might say, I don't want to be in this situation. So in that case, though, I think it's different than with abortion because the individual who is then dying has the choice, whereas when it comes to a fetus who is being terminated because they're disabled, they're not given that choice.
Well, and that's the other biological question. Where do you say life is when sperm meets egg, whereas others would put it a little later, not even at blastocyst, not at embryo, but more at the fetus stage.
Right.
Or at the point where the fetus could suffer from the process, right?
Yeah.
But I also understand that if that's the case, because we're not really sure, but I think we err on the side of caution and anesthetize the child before the procedure actually takes place, right?
Right. Well, it's not so much what I would say, but it's what embryologists and biologists have long said, which is that every human body begins his or her development at sperm and ovum fusion. So at that point, yes, they're not conscious, yes, they can't feel pain, but the body itself has begun a development that's lifelong development. So it's not so much that I say that life begins, it's, what have the biologists told us, and every embryology textbook that I've ever looked at will say that the body itself begins at sperm-egg fusion.
And
go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead, Randy, because my questions are more then become, what if this person is terminating it for viable reasons like rape, and then there's all those other...
Yeah, that's a boundary issue, not a pro-life issue. Here's the problem. I can grant you personhood, I can grant you right to life, and I would still be in favor of access to abortion. And here's the reason why. And this is Judith Jarvis Thompson's. This goes back to Judith Jarvis Thompson, and she writes about this, and I'll quote this. You wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous violinist who has a fatal kidney ailment. You alone have the right blood type to help, and so you have been kidnapped and plugged into the violinist's circulatory system so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. You were told that if you disconnect him, he will die. But if you allow him to remain plugged into you for 9 months, he will be cured and survive. And it comes down to a problem of consent. And it has to be consent given, not consent requested. It has to be consent given from the person who is actually acting as an incubator. How do you respond to that argument?
Right. Well, there's a number of reasons why I feel that argument isn't analogous to pregnancy. One of the first of which is that the famous violinist has no relation to you whatsoever. And so I would argue that, yeah, you don't actually have an obligation to this stranger. It would be really nice if you were to help him or her out, but you're not obligated to help them, whereas parents do have basic obligations to their offspring. And so if that is your offspring that you brought into existence, you've got different obligations to them than you would to, say, a stranger. Now, there's certain kinds of obligations that you do and don't have. I think you don't have an obligation to any extreme things, such as, bring your child to Disney World, for instance. But you do have basic obligations that include feeding your child, protecting your child from harm, giving them shelter, and at very least ensuring that you're not doing anything that will intentionally or actively end their life, which is what abortion effectively does. Second of all, abortion isn't like denying somebody the right to hook up to your kidneys. Abortion is actually the intentional ending of someone's life. It's more akin to saying, like, rather than saying, no, I'm not going to give you my kidney, it's more akin of ending their life and saying, I'm not going to let you have any of my resources ever again.
But isn't that exactly what you do if you unhook from the violinist?
No, because if you're unhooking from the violinist, you're not actively ending its life, or ending his life.
Yeah, you are.
You're letting,
I don't see a
die.
difference.
Okay, well, here's the difference. In the case of the violinist, he or she has this fatal illness and needs your kidney to survive. Well, in the case of a pregnancy, the fetus is not dying. The fetus is alive, and it's the abortion that will effectively end his or her life. You
understand that so is the violinist as long as he's hooked to you, right?
Right. The violinist doesn't have an obligation to any rights to your kidneys, whereas a fetus does have a right to his or her parents' resources.
Now we're getting somewhere, because this is the problem I have with the pro-life movement, is that these people, you included, want to give the fetus rights that no one else has. And I see a big problem with that. It's actually giving special rights, which no other demographic has, and I find that highly problematic, and I'm going to say that. I'm going to use that word. I'm taking that word back.
So Randy, you kind of view that as a parasitic situation. But I think it would be more defined as interdependent. No, it's not interdependent because the mother doesn't depend on it. It is more parasitic.
It's actually more similar, I would argue, to a situation of conjoined twins, where one depends on the other's body in order to survive.
But they both don't.
No, that's codependence. That's codependence.
Not always. Not always. But there are certain conjoined twins where they don't have the ability to separate them.
That's kind of irrelevant. That's kind of irrelevant.
That you had a girl.
Mm-hmm.
The potential mother's body is not dependent upon a fetus at all.
Right. But the fetus is dependent on the woman's body.
Right.
So
is
it
the violinist.
Is similar to a conjoined twin, where one twin depends and relies on the stronger, bigger twin in order to survive.
Those conjoined twins can be parasitic too, interdependent. Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of a scale there, and most likely, the ones that can be separated certainly don't. So there's a lot of degrees there.
Right, but nonetheless, my point is essentially that there is the fetus is reliant on the woman's body in a similar way that a conjoined twin would be reliant on their sibling's body in order to survive. So it's not so much. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it'd be hard to decide, but the part I agree with you when it's in a situation where it's ideal, like when you're married and can afford it and stuff. And then, what if the woman is going to end up killing that child anyway because of malnutrition when they're born? I've seen many women try to get away with. Yeah, like I've seen women try to feed children coffee meat because that's all they can afford, and they don't eat enough themselves to provide breast milk, so the child dies anyway of malnutrition. Like that's another extreme case, but there's always varying degrees.
Right, and that's really important. It's like, I'm not in favor of just everybody having kids and abusing kids. I think that would be the wrong solution. What we need as a society to kill problems, not people. And if we had a case of a child who was 2 years old and there was a good indication that his mother wasn't going to have the ability to care for him, kill problems, and that he was not people. Yeah. Right.
That's
and if we had a case of a child who was 2 years old and there was a good indication that his mother wasn't going to have the ability to care.
Sorry, Chris. Sorry.
So did anybody else hear an echo? Because all of a sudden I cut out and I heard myself.
Yeah, I might have been. I'm not sure where that is. Yeah.
Okay.
Everything's fine on my end.
Okay.
All right. I'm no longer hearing myself. That's good. So anyway, yes. So the solution then is if we had a 2-year-old that we knew was going to be abused or in some way harmed, the solution would be to address those problems and say, how can we help you be a better parent? Or if there's indication that this person's not going to be a good parent, that we should then share the responsibility of this parenthood, either by placing the child into a home where they're not going to be abused. So, this happens all the time, not just through unwanted pregnancies, but many wanted children. Things happen in the parent's life, and poverty could happen to somebody who was originally well off. Things could change. The indication that this person's not going to be a good parent, that we should then. I'm hearing this echo again.
That's Skype doing that to you, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Well, and then why force this mother to not terminate a pregnancy and to go through getting her child taken away then because she's not able to provide for it? It seems kind of cruel.
Well, it's not what I'm not advocating that we force her to have a child that she's not going to be able to care for. I'm saying as a society that we have first of all, the obligation to support women, to support families in general, and to ensure and that hopefully this won't happen and they won't be taken away. But there's no other circumstance in which we would see somebody who is going to be potentially abusive or potentially have a difficult circumstances in raising their kids, where we would say, okay, well, the solution then is for you to end this child's life.
Before it's viable. Right. So that they don't have to go through having that child and then seeing it suffer and then seeing it taken away, because that happens horribly a lot in these Aboriginal communities when they don't have access to birth control. Like, it happens more than any of us would think. But then, of course, they don't half the time have the access to abortion. But if they did, why take yet another thing away? Like, it's such a societal cycle. And when you...
I think you like I said, you raise a valid point, and I think that as a society we have every obligation to be supporting women. You mentioned Aboriginal communities. By all means, I don't think we're doing enough to be supporting mothers and families in general. Right.
Like, I mean, a lot of pro-lifers, not you. You're probably not opposed to birth control, but that's where the conundrum comes in with the people that are opposed to birth control and opposed to abortion. Right. It's so frustrating. They would take these Aboriginal women and say, you have to have 10 children, that's it, and if you can't feed them, well, tough. Whereas at least you have that. We are not anti-birth control.
But then again, too, we have this history of sterilizing, Aboriginal women, so there's that too.
Yeah,
right?
That's terrible.
Yeah, and how abortion can be weaponized against a culture, and that reproductive rights can be taken away from women as a culture to essentially try to genocidal, right. Really.
That's why I find the line of reasoning with allowing access to birth control and then helping them after that than saying just flat out no birth control, no abortion, no assistance to the needy, because
we're getting far afield here.
We're
getting far afield here.
Well, and just to, if I can bring it back then to the point you made just right before we went down that trail, if the unborn are human beings, and this is like my position starts from that premise that the unborn are human, then there is no reason why we would justify ending their life for any circumstance or reason that we would not use to justify ending a born child's life.
Well,
so
I am not at all convinced that special rights should be granted to fetuses, and I do not see any significant difference between the violinist and a fetus. I really don't.
Well,
I haven't heard anything that would change my mind.
Okay, well, the violinist, first of all, is, like I said, the violinist is not biologically, you have no moral obligation to them, whereas you do have a moral obligation to your offspring. You brought them into existence.
Once they're born, yes.
You brought them into existence. They exist because of your choices.
What did you just say? So it's oh no, okay.
Oh no.
Are you really going to use the consequences argument that it's women's fault for getting pregnant? No, that's what you just said.
No, not fault. I'm saying
you said it's their choices.
Why do children exist?
Biology.
Sometimes rape, sometimes broken condoms.
Got it. It is biology, and it's not your fault. It's not a consequence punishment.
But it's because of their choice.
It is a case of somebody's choice. So whether it's the rapist's choice, whether it's your choice, whether it's both of your choices, somebody made that choice. Somehow that penis got into that vagina. It wasn't the embryo. Didn't climb up in there.
You made a choice to have sex. You did not have a choice, but that necessarily to have children. They're not the same thing.
Right. And I can totally appreciate that. You made a choice to have sex. However, our choices do have natural consequences. A equals B. If I blow up a balloon, the balloon is going to pop. There are certain things that follow from the results of our actions.
Appeal to consequences. That's a logical fallacy. It's also a naturalistic fallacy.
I really don't see it as a consequence that sex does create fetuses. That's just natural biology.
So it's a consequence of.
Okay, sure, you can call it that, but I mean, it's an actual fact that fetuses don't climb up into uteruses on their own. Fetuses are not like violinists that force themselves upon your body and say, "Feed me, bitch."
They do.
They're not. They
do. They force themselves upon your body
by their own choice. They got there by the adult's choice.
So it's their fault. So it's women's fault.
I wouldn't say fault. I would say that it got there because of our choices as adults.
I'll speak as someone who got her choice taken away by the guy who took the condom off.
Right.
I had to live with that choice, and then the father died. I brought up this child alone and dealt with the single mom being the scapegoat for all the ills of society. I had to deal with, to this day, being that person that supposedly made bad choices and now just lives with the consequences. I don't get societal benefits because when Stockwell Day was scapegoating single parents and single moms in particular, even Klein did that. Klein would say that these single bitches are giving their welfare money to their boyfriends for booze. I had a horrible time bringing up this child by myself. I faced a lot of, I don't know what you call it, bigotry from people that felt they were doing better, that probably had a freaking abortion. So speaking as someone who had to live with these consequences and then deal with society with them, that's when I get my back up and tell everybody else, stay out of everybody else's business and let them have their abortions.
Right. And I'm very sorry that you've been through that, and I think that's one thing that society really does wrong, is that we don't support women. We don't support women enough. And the fact that you didn't have society backing you up and saying, to the partner, or to you should have had more support than you got, and you should not have had that. And
more validation for not having an abortion, for goodness sakes. Right. Like, good for you didn't have an abortion. It's like, oh, you're a single mom. You had sex. You had this kid. The father's dead. Whatever. Now you're a parasite. This is horrible.
Yeah,
So if society was different, I would absolutely be more conformed to your view.
Right. And I think that's one thing, I could say on behalf of, the pro-life movement, is that there's a lot of people out there who have what I believe to be very hurtful and harmful views, even as pro-lifers. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but, there are a lot of people who do deserve the title of being pro-birth. If you don't care about people once they're born, you're not pro-life. And the example that you went through just proves that to me.
Yeah, I hate playing the victim, but I'm sorry, but I had a hard time getting a job. People would ask me, why are you looking for 2 jobs, kids or school? And I would say I have a 5-year-old, and they would get up from the table and walk away.
Wow.
Okay, I've got a couple of comments here. So you would also be against the morning after pill?
Not necessarily, because I'm not convinced that the morning after pill causes abortions. I think there's some evidence in that direction, but I've also heard things differently from stuff that I've been reading recently. So I'm actually going to reserve judgment on that until I've done more reading, just because I think if the morning after pill works as many people claim that it does, and it only prevents it basically just acts as like a super dose of the birth control pill, which prevents ovulation and helps prevent the sperm and ovum from meeting, then I wouldn't have a problem with that. If
it actually prevents the blastocyst from implanting in the uterine wall.
Right. If it does that, in which case, then yes, it would be like a very early abortion, and I think that would be morally problematic.
Wait a minute. If you're against, not necessarily in abortive fashion, but something that prevents sperm and egg meeting, you're interfering with biology.
No, if you're preventing sperm and egg from meeting, there's no abortion at that point. If sperm and ovum haven't met,
you're splitting hairs now.
No, not at all. I'm splitting humans.
Splitting hairs. You can interfere with biology sometimes, but not in others. I think you're splitting hairs.
Body, if sperm and ovum never meet, or if sperm and ovum don't meet because of a condom, or they don't meet because you're in Timbuktu and the other one's in China, sperm and ovum don't meet. There is no fertilization at that point. So there's no body at that point.
But you're still interfered with the biology. I mean, you're actually using special pleading here. You're saying certain cases, that's wrong, and in other cases it's okay. You're still interfering with biology.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's a consequence of biology, and you're interfering with it. What's the difference?
I have absolutely no problem with preventing conception, with contraception. I don't see any issue with that, morally speaking. Sperm and ovum don't meet. There is no pregnancy. There is no conception. It's no different than me not conceiving somebody because I stayed home instead of going out downtown and sleeping with somebody. There's nothing. I don't see how you could argue that it's special pleading. My only argument is that once sperm and ovum have met, and there is a body that comes into existence, at that point it is morally objectionable to end that body's life.
Okay, I just don't agree. I see it as absolutely special. I can
understand the argument, though. I can understand the argument, and I can accept it even if I disagree with it, right?
No, you can't accept it if you disagree with it.
Kristine.
You can entertain it, but you can't accept it if you disagree with it.
Pardon?
You can entertain it.
No, I can accept all kinds of arguments.
If you don't agree with it, how can you accept it?
Now we're really getting into
You're not.
No, I can accept that that's a persuasive argument without necessarily agreeing with it. If we're talking about whether it's
then how is it persuasive?
Because we're talking about persuasion, not
Right, but it didn't persuade you, did it?
No, but I can see where it's
where there's a point.
If it didn't persuade you, it wasn't persuasive. Yeah, what you mean is I think there are valid points, maybe.
Nuance here, right?
But
I think she's displaying nuance, not a rigid opinion. Like I think it's if that's how she wants to justify the use of the morning after pill, I'm okay with that.
I'm basically just saying if no life has come into existence, then it's not a problem.
Yeah, there is a blastocyst. What it does is it causes uterine lining to be washed away, and therefore then it can't implant. So
yeah, Yeah, it can, and I've heard some studies that show that perhaps it doesn't do that. So if it doesn't do that, in which case it's not a problem, it's just contraception. If it does, then yes, it would be morally problematic.
Yeah, because the blastocyst does form before it gets washed out with the uterus. So there is that.
Yeah, if sperm and ovum meet, then a blastocyst forms, correct.
Yeah.
If they don't meet because the birth control pill works by preventing ovulation or by preventing thickening the cervical mucus so that the sperm and ovum can't meet, at that point it's contraception. So.
Yeah. Yeah, just the morning after pill is definitely abortion because the blastocyst is formed and gets washed out. And the pill keeps egg and sperm because the pill prevents the egg from being released, so it can't meet the sperm.
Right.
Okay. Well, now what about, for instance, picketing of abortion clinics? Where does that fit in?
I don't it's not something I'm interested in doing. I think it depends on what you mean by picketing. I know people who do go stand in front of clinics just to talk to women and offer them alternatives and say, you don't have to have an abortion, we can help you. I think there's definitely a place for doing that. I definitely would disagree with people that would stand in front of clinics to yell or scream or call women names. I think there's no place for that.
Okay.
No bullying.
I think
offering help versus bullying.
Yeah, well,
this is exactly
nice
the sort of
bullying is what it
nuance.
is. That's what it is. I mean, as if people don't know that there are alternatives. You seriously think that people don't know that there are alternatives to having an abortion?
I think there are many times when women don't necessarily have access to all the information that they wish that they would or they should. I know for a fact that there are many people who, for instance, at Aid to Women in Toronto, there's an abortion clinic right next door to Aid to Women, and Aid to Women staff will often come and stand on the sidewalk and they'll talk to the women there, and they'll say, we have alternatives, we can help you out. And many of them have gone next door and said, I'm happy that you told me this because I was kind of feeling reluctant. They were kind of either being pressured, and we know this for a fact. If you go to Alan Guttmacher Institute and you look up the reasons why women have abortions, a good number of women do have abortions because they are being pressured by a partner or by their parents who are threatening to kick them out. Yeah. It's not as free of a choice as we've been often led to believe.
That's true, but it doesn't mean that we should not have a choice.
The choice is often a fake choice. So offering, and you're asking specifically about standing in front of abortion clinics, that is what they're often able to access, is to talk to somebody and say, hey, if your parents are kicking you out of your house, we've got someone who can board you, and many people have gone over and said, thank you for having that resource available.
I wonder how many didn't think.
When my husband found out I was pregnant with our second child, he suggested abortion, and that crushed me as a person. If he could just have said, I'm in this with you and yada yada. Well, I couldn't have an abortion anyway because I was too far along by the time I figured it out. But to have a partner say that to you and you're in that state, I would love for someone to take my hand. Now, if I was a woman who had made up my mind, I would sidestep these people and tell them, leave me alone. But I would, being in that situation, I would appreciate it, hearing from somebody else other than my partner.
Right. Yeah, and I'm so sorry that your partner wasn't supportive for you. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
It was terrible. And then his parents were all like, what? Because I gotten fixed. And they're like, why didn't you wait for scar tissue to build up? And they were making it all my fault.
Right.
If I could have had an abortion, they might have pushed it. But thankfully, the child was far along and kind of killed the argument. It still really upset me.
I bet.
Yeah.
Well,
it's unfortunate. All sides of these things.
Yeah, with the Morgenthaler decision, though, the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that fetuses do not have personhood status.
Because of those reasons. Yeah.
And so it kind of, from a legal standpoint, none of your arguments would ever win the day in court.
Well, I
Is that
think
okay?
part of the problem is that we're looking at this with really old laws. The laws in Canada were decided in terms of when life begins are based on like ancient law that dates back to like colonial England. I mean, back in the day when they believed in quickening and just, they just didn't know. Whereas nowadays we have much better science. We have much better evidence for
You mean they
when
didn't have
bodies
science
begin.
in the Morgenthaler decision? We had
No,
that
the
science. It was
the
there.
the science, the decision, actually, the Morgenthaler decision had nothing to do with whether or not the fetus is a human being at that point. The Morgenthaler decision was based on privacy, very similar to the law in Roe v. Wade. And in fact, all of the Supreme Court judges, every last one of them, said that it was up to the courts then that there should be some protection for fetuses at some point in pregnancy, but that the law as it stood was not adequate, and that it was up to the MPs to make a new law to protect fetuses. And even the most pro-choice judge of them all said it should probably be sometime in the second or third trimester.
Okay, but then you would still disagree with that Supreme Court judge.
I would, because I don't think privacy is the be-all and end-all when it comes to when human life begins. Women can't abuse their children if they do so privately. The question really boils down to, when does a human life begin? And a human life does not begin at birth. That's just a change of location. There's nothing magical about going through the birth canal that turns a non-living tissue blob into a human being.
It's about consent. I mean, there's no room for consent in your argument. And I just find that bizarre.
What do you mean?
Consent of the person who is incubating a fetus.
The woman, the woman's situation, and why I agree to the
Consent
privacy.
is given. It is not. It's not taken.
Right, and I think that consent is present in pregnancy in the sense that you have, even in a case where you don't know that someone is dependent upon you, you don't have the ability to then throw them. Like, for instance, if you had a boat and you had someone accidentally got onto your boat because you left the gate open, and all of a sudden you come down and there's like this kid playing on your boat downstairs, and you're like, what the heck are you doing on my boat? I did not consent to you being here. Therefore, I don't have the obligation to feed you or take care of you. In fact, I'm just going to now take you and toss you overboard because I didn't never give you consent to be here. You would actually be found guilty of ending this person's
absolutely
life.
right.
Because it's no longer a blastocyst, because it's no longer.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
if you apply the rules in that situation, then it's the same situation when it comes to pregnancy. That even if you didn't intentionally want this person to come aboard your boat, in this case your uterus, you don't have
Sorry,
the
I
right
find
to
that funny.
Analogies are never going to be perfect. I'm not
Yeah.
calling
This isn't
women
even
for-
close to perfect. This is terrible.
Well, I mean, the application, if it's true in one case, it would be true in the other. That just because you didn't consent to becoming responsible for another human being does not then give you the right to end that human being's life.
I disagree that was up to a point. I agree that I get to end their life up to, say, a certain embryo stage, let's say, like, for me. But the thing is, we don't get to apply personal beliefs and reasonings to the laws. So if they were to change the Morgenthaler law and such, I would request that it would be like up to this point in the fetal development or embryonic development or blastocyst development. And again, everybody would have a different opinion of, okay, where do you draw that line? And I think I like Roe versus Wade and Morgenthaler for the fact that, again, in my opinion, it's then up to the woman, her own personal situation, the doctor, partner, and all of that. And there's so many complications. So I can agree with you up to a point, and then, of course, everybody's going to have a different point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that boundary, I think, right?
But that's the thing,
and each
right?
of us, yeah.
Everybody has their own boundary. And
Right.
why would you want to force somebody who completely disagrees with you to abide by your boundary?
Well, my boundary is essentially that we don't kill human beings. And a fetus, if you look at the biological evidence, has human parents, and they are alive. We know that because they're growing. And therefore, if they're human by virtue of their parents and they are alive by virtue of the fact that they are growing, then just like all other human beings, they have the basic right to not be killed. And so that would apply, and I believe that laws should apply to include them in the definition of human beings. So the Morgenthaler law in that regard is wrong, because it didn't even ask the question of when does a human life begin. It doesn't begin at birth.
I don't
It
think it's
certainly
relevant.
doesn't.
I don't think the court thought it was relevant.
Well, the
And
courts
I
did
agree.
think it was. The courts thought it was relevant to a point, because that's why they
a
said there
point.
should be some protections to the
But-
fetus.
Yeah, but the idea that a couple of cells equals a human being, no, I mean, sorry.
That's where I agree with Randy.
There's no way.
I can't equate a human being to
And
4 cells or
since
32
you cannot
cells. Or
Then you're
Fine
disagreeing
where
with
that
every
is.
You're disagreeing with every
No,
single biological
biologically
textbook out there.
speaking, they're human being in the sense that they're the potential for growing, but that's not the only consideration, is it? I mean,
Okay,
you're
what are
not.
the
You
others?
don't have. How does a blastocyst have experiences? How does it?
Does an infant have experiences? Like it's when it's just been freshly born.
Absolutely.
When it's been
Well,
freshly born.
Peter Singer would argue
Absolutely.
differently, Randy. Peter Singer would
Yeah,
argue
Peter Singer
differently.
would actually. Yes, he would. He said he would countenance postnatal
up to 2
abortion.
years, kind
Yeah.
of like, yeah. If a child is like really severely suffering and that kind of thing, euthanizing a child isn't a problem.
Yeah, I don't
for
have a problem with that.
him, at least. Yeah, I guess. Well, anybody that's suffering, I don't have a problem, euthanizing. If they can't consciously, consent themselves, then, and that's a tough decision that somebody might have to make, but if it's clear and obvious suffering. And I guess that's my line too with abortion, like when can a fetus experience pain? That would be my line. And in the case of
That's a reasonable
anesthetizing a child, if it's a late term thing that needs to be done to save the mother's life or something like that, then there is that, I guess, assurance that it's essentially what we do to our pets when they're suffering, right? Anesthetize the thing and then put it to sleep. And I don't mean
Well,
well, no, I don't mean well.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, we love our pets. I'm sure that some people that are probably in a position that kind of have to do that feel horrific, right? But I guess that's my line, is the line of suffering. When a being can feel suffering, has the capacity for suffering.
Cool.
Just to clarify, like, is that your position for, like, when it comes to late-term abortions, that they should be euthanized, or you're talking just in general for when you think personhood begins?
I think biologically, I agree with you that it begins at conception, but in terms of capacity to feel pain and the capacity to suffer, that I think that would be my line.
Okay. Well, here's why I would disagree with that line. And it largely rests with the fact that there are even born human beings who don't have the capacity to feel pain, and yet we would still argue that they are human beings.
They still suffer, though. Like, if they, like, blood loss and, like, a loss of a limb, like, there's a lot of suffering. Even if you don't feel pain, you still... And to go through...
But there are people who literally, they touch a stove and they just simply have no nerve endings, or their nerve endings are not wired to feel pain. I hadn't really thought of that argument, and I think that's a really interesting one to bring to bear. I guess
you're still going to suffer a blister, though, or loss of a finger, or
that's true, and I guess
debatably,
yeah.
I mean, it depends on how you define suffering too, but that gets into a whole existential debate that's probably way beyond the scope of this podcast.
Yeah,
but
I'd agree with that. Yeah. But yeah, that's an interesting point. You haven't persuaded me, but I find it an interesting point.
It's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where'd Randy go? Oh, there he
I'm
is.
here. I'm here. I'm just seeing
we
if
got
anybody else has
calls?
more comments. We haven't had any We've had lots of comments.
Okay.
Let me go to the.
Invite people who are commenting to comment.
I have done that.
I can't see the comments, so if you have anything interesting,
Yeah, if you go to the YouTube page on the video,
Legion of
the YouTube
Reason.
page, and
It'll be delayed, but
Okay.
don't have the volume on, because then otherwise you'll really get an echo.
Yeah, I'm afraid to touch anything. I'll break it.
Yeah. Beach Price says, my mother got pregnant a year after the doctor said she had gone through menopause. Was that consent to getting pregnant at the age of 50?
Good question. I think that in general, sex can lead to pregnancy, and so in that regard, yes, not consent to being pregnant necessarily, but consent to the possibility. And unless you have no uterus, the likelihood is there, even if it's not a definite likelihood, it's a possibility.
Well, and she made a personal choice not to deal with it one way, but to have the child. And I'm happy for him that she went that route.
Likewise.
Snowberry says, the choice is between a woman and not a man and a woman, a woman and her doctor. There are women who have late-term abortions because the fetus has something medically wrong with it. You were talking about. We were talking about.
I think Kristine's already conceded that point.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, with the fetus being medically wrong, I mean, it also too depends on what you mean by medically wrong. If they're going to be dead, brain dead, then they're not alive. That's not really ending someone's life. But if they're just going to be disabled, there are lots of disabled people in society, and I think that we have an obligation to treat them with respect and dignity, and give them the support and the love that we would any other human being. So, whether it's somebody who's going to be born with Down syndrome, of which 90%, by the way, are aborted, which I find absolutely appalling, or many other disabilities, some of which might be difficult to live life with, but it's still a question of, is it a human being, and how do we treat human beings that are disabled?
So there's a line.
You
There's
actually have to get
witness
consent between human beings. That's my answer to that.
Yeah, you're mixing arguments, but
Not at all.
No, I don't understand what you're saying, actually.
This is all consent. I could grant you all of your points, and I'd still say this is all about consent. That's it. That's the only thing that I'm interested in.
Okay, so do you think that a parent has to consent to, or if you suddenly had a child dropped off on your doorstep, and there was nobody around, you're in the middle of nowhere, there's no one else who can feed this child, do you think you have an obligation to, at very least, keep this child alive, or to, at very least, not snuff the child out with a pillow?
Sure, because it's
I
not
can take
using
it somewhere else
body.
in the morning. You
There's
can't
a
take
big
that embryo
difference.
somewhere else.
Yeah, there's a big difference between giving somebody food and water and using parasitically somebody else. I mean, this is apples and oranges.
No, I will grant there's a big difference. There's a lot more bodily resources that are required in pregnancy, no question whatsoever.
And that's the only thing that matters.
But I would still argue that you have a de facto guardian obligation to a child, regardless of whether or not you consented to bring that child into your life or into your body, by very virtue of the fact that this child is a human being that is dependent on you. I believe that's where that de facto argument, or that de facto obligation, comes from. Second of all, the fact that it is your own offspring.
That's totally irrelevant. That is totally irrelevant.
No, because I think Kristine has argued that we have a social role as a society to I guess, do away with exactly the kind of experiences Twyla so clearly articulated.
What's that?
Well,
explain.
The stigma against single motherhood.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Having to struggle through a pregnancy after your husband has died. Wow.
I agree, that's horrible. I just don't understand the relevance here.
Well, and then there's the other one where if society breaks down, these people would die anyway, like the disabled and stuff. So we're in a position now as a society to be better than that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I completely agree. And now, just to go back to the debate with the parental obligations, I think that by virtue of the fact that they are your offspring, that gives you, if you have a basic obligation, a de facto obligation to a child that shows up that you can't bring anywhere else, for the sake of argument, this is the middle of nowhere, you can't call anybody, the phone lines are down, it's a really bad storm, whatever, or you're on that boat we talked about earlier. by virtue of there being no one else who could step in to keep this child alive, I believe that in and of itself gives you an obligation towards this offspring, towards this child. But even more so, if that's your own offspring, parents have a basic obligation to their kids to feed their kids, to shelter their kids, to keep their kids alive, and at bare minimum, the obligation to not intentionally cause them death, which abortion does.
But then there's that other argument where that child, you can drop it off with a nun or a hospital or something, whereas you can't take that embryo and just drop it off somewhere. So
sure, and
it's a little bit.
And I think that actually increases the obligation. If there is no one else around who could take care of that child, then I think that doesn't justify that justifies abortion even less, because by virtue of the fact there's no one else who could take care of that child, it increases your own obligation to them.
So some
the
people
more dependent, they are.
Sorry,
but they're dependent on that parasitic basis too. And if I know that baby's going to be born, and my own mother had a mental illness, and I did suffer a dreadful childhood. And again, at this point, it's society that failed. But had she no resources to help her, I definitely would have. If there was no social services to feed us when she couldn't keep her job, I would have died. She probably would have left. She probably would have thrown me to the wolves, knowing her. So,
yeah. So
I just
want to hug you. I feel like I'm really sorry that you've been through that kind of a childhood.
Me too. Absolutely,
I'm sure we could.
Because again, this is where society needs to step in again too.
For sure.
But
it's
hard for me because I don't want to be forced to have a baby, even though I was. I didn't want to be in that situation. And then to tell another woman, well, you're even more obligated now. I couldn't do that myself. What you just said, I couldn't tell another woman. So it's a very different personality.
Yeah, well, I hear you, and I think it's a very difficult situation, especially if she's going through or she's not somebody who should be a parent. She's got difficult circumstances. However, I think the argument still stands that if she's pregnant with a human offspring, then she has a moral obligation to not inflict death upon that child. And then we as a society have also an obligation, which is to support her, to make sure that those resources are there for her and for her child once that child's born, so that if she's not in proper circumstances to raise a child, that we enable whatever we need to do, whether it's by things like increasing minimum wage, whether it's like support networks.
Well, taking me away from that parent would have been nice, and not putting me in a that foster home was awful. Like for a long time, I wished she had aborted me. Like honestly, all the way up into my 30s, I wished I had been an abortion.
Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that you've been through that.
So it's hard for me to tell someone else. Well, that's why I'm like so like okay, it's not my business.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, though, we could also talk about many people who have gone through really horrible lives and difficult circumstances, who because of those circumstances have come out different people, stronger people. So I don't think it's really any of our it's up to any of us to say, well, this child should not get the right to live because of his or her mother, because she's a bad mother or she might be a bad parent. Like, who are we to say that your life isn't worth living because of how horrible your mother's going to be? I'm really happy that your mother didn't abort you. I've only just met you, but
me too.
There we go. So we got someone else about just. I'm sorry that you had to go through a difficult life, and I think, as I said earlier, that's what we need to do, is kill problems, not people.
Whoops, we lost somebody. Lost Twyla.
I didn't do it.
Okay, let's try and figure. Well, let's go to something I want to ask. Is that okay? Say we outlawed abortion. What would be the charge for somebody who did have an abortion?
That's a really good question, and it's actually one I've thought about a lot recently, because I've recently started rethinking my views about prison in general. I think that a lot of what we do is first of all, not affect. Yeah, she's back.
Stupid computer.
So, yeah, stupid computer. Right, yeah, so when it comes to what we would do if someone did have an abortion, back before it was illegal, it was generally the physicians or the practitioner, whoever it was that was committing the illegal abortion, that was penalized. I don't know of many. Actually, I can't think of any circumstances in which a woman would have been punished. I think even back then, at least in North America, it was always, the woman got immunity in order to turn in the physician who was practicing the abortion.
So instead, women would do the coat hangers or throw themselves down the stairs or...
Okay, yeah. That did happen. I grant I'm sure that it happened, but it definitely did not happen in the numbers that it happened in. And I know that for a fact. People have claimed, for instance, that it happened like thousands and thousands of women that died from illegal abortion. That's not the case. In fact, if you look at Planned Parenthood back in 1960, there's an article that they had written in, I believe it was a Journal of Obstetrician or something. I can pull it out if you want to, but where this is back in 1960, about 13 years before Roe v. Wade, where they themselves were saying, no, abortion is actually safely done, it's safely being practiced. 90% of abortions are being practiced safely by physicians who are just doing this privately after hours or whatnot. So the numbers have been claimed as being, as high as like 5,000 women per year, but the numbers just don't add up. When you look at the number of women that died per year, statistically it's not possible for that many women to have died from illegal abortions.
But why force them underground?
I don't want to force them underground. I don't want to see abortions happening anywhere.
Doesn't matter whether you want it or not, it's going to happen.
It doesn't have to, and I think that's where. No, it doesn't. If we
nothing has to happen.
The only
it's irrelevant.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, here's the thing. The only good reason to ever make abortion illegal is that we as a society have decided that because the unborn are human beings, they deserve protection. So in a society like that, we would also be acknowledging that women have the duty, we have an obligation to be helping women. And a lot of the reasons why women are having abortions and why women were having abortions illegally back before it was legalized are things that we could be and should be improving as a society.
So I wonder if abortion is less in Sweden than in the United States per capita or whatever, just because they have a better system.
Well, there's a lot of
socioeconomic
issues, right?
Yeah,
it's interesting actually. There are more women who have abortions when it comes to the number of women who have unplanned pregnancies, but there is a lot fewer women that have unplanned pregnancies, significantly fewer women in various parts of Europe that I've looked at. So I think that's just, to me, goes to show just what we could do in a society where we make abortion illegal. First of all, we're making it illegal because we believe that the unborn are human. So we don't want to see abortions, whether legal or illegal. We want to be supporting the women who feel like they have no other option, that they would be driven to have an abortion.
Well, so what if it was just unnecessary and didn't happen? Would it have to be illegal?
If it was never happening?
Yeah. Like in a place where women have access to birth control and have supports when they have children, would you have to make it illegal if it's not happening?
It's a moot point because it would still happen.
I would disagree with that. I think
why a woman doesn't want a child and does something about it. That's going to happen.
Okay.
How do you get to know that it'll never happen?
I think that it's we could not say never, but I think it's very possible to do a huge amount of things to make it to be the point of almost never.
You're not answering my question. Okay, go ahead. Okay, here we go. All right. Go ahead.
If we're addressing the circumstances that lead women to have abortions in the first place, first of all, the woman who definitely does not want to have a child, we can make a lot of things more accessible. For instance, a lot of women in their 20s and 30s who don't want children are being told, no, you cannot have sterilization because you're too young. That's something that we need to be changing. In terms of, a woman who would be too dangerous for her to have a pregnancy, same thing. Like, why is she not being given the right to have sterilization? In terms of poverty, in terms of addressing, all the circumstances, the vast majority of, if you look at Alan Guttmacher, the reasons why women are having abortions, these are all things that we can and should be addressing as a society. And I would argue that one of the reasons we're not addressing them is because we have this Band-Aid solution of abortion right now that kind of just glazes over it and fixes the problem. It doesn't fix the problem, it just slides it under the carpet.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt here. And I have a friend who actually would agree with you because she was doing her due diligence with birth control but got pregnant twice, and the second time she's like, in her 20s, like, please sterilize me, and they wouldn't do it by virtue of her age.
Yeah.
So I think I'd be, if I were a physician, I might be super uncomfortable sterilizing somebody that was, I don't know, under 25, right? Because they might change their minds. Right.
That was about what I was just going to ask, and Snowberry is on here. They may not want a baby now, but maybe later. It is still on the table. So some women want to start a career or finish their education first. What happens? Right. Are you going to force these women to come to term and ruin their careers or their education? Seriously?
Well, here's the thing. Why? Why should a baby ruin a career or education? To me, that's already something in society that's a problem. If a woman can't be a woman with her full capacities, including her capacity to be pregnant and nurse a child, then it seems to me that we have a very patriarchal society that needs to be changed. If she can't, if there's no allowances for her to take extra time off when her child's sick, or there's no allowances for her to be able to bring her child to work, if there's no stations or daycare on site, free accessible daycare in every employment center, these are, it seems to me that society is built around women having to put their fertility on hold while they have their education, while they further their careers. So that's something that we could consider changing, because right now it's not a very pro-woman society.
No, it's not. That makes me sad too. But
society.
Yeah, it's not pro-family. It's very. What was I going to say? It's kind of sad, that statement. That is a statement of our society. But when will it get fixed? When will this utopia happen? Can we even ever plan for it? I'm starting to lose faith. Well, I've lost faith in humanity on a few different levels. So I just don't think we're ever going to get there.
And I show your frustration. I think that it's a difficult thing to even imagine. But part of it is just having, first of all, these discussions and being able to say, like, look, what we're doing right now isn't working. If we have to end our preborn offspring's lives in order to be able to advance ourselves as women, then, as my friends at New Wave Feminists have said, it's basically just oppression redistributed. We've taken the oppression from our own shoulders and passed it on to our offspring and said, well, I can't have this child because I need to further my life. Well, does it have to be our life versus their life? Why can we not advance and move forward as women without having to lose our children?
Because Ralph Klein needs to balance budget.
Sorry, I missed that.
It's a political thing. Those guys always got to balance the budget. They don't give a crap about the children or the and if you're not a billionaire, you shouldn't have children. So there.
Well, I think we as women have to rise up and say sorry, but this isn't working.
And get rid of Trump.
Yes.
Trump?
Why do women keep voting for him? He doesn't give a crap about childcare. Like, come on. His stupid daughter thinks 6 weeks of maternity is just fine.
Mm. Yeah. Well, that's something that needs to change. That really needs to change. Because I think the States is one of, 2 countries in the world without maternity care?
Yeah.
And the other one is, somewhere in, Papua New Guinea or something.
I know.
Come on, guys.
The United States is so backwards, and it affects a lot of other countries because they affect us economically. The buggers. Like, ooh. People are
All
like,
right.
why do you care about
We're
who's
getting off
president?
topic. We're getting off topic. Let's leave that.
We get this utopian lifestyle where we don't need abortions. We got to fix that stuff.
Right. So yes, we have common ground here, so that's good.
Well,
Yeah, I agree with much of what you said in the sense that, people might very well make different choices if they lived in a society that was more supportive of motherhood and like you say, the family, Randy.
Yeah. I think that I am a very big proponent of heavily subsidized daycare, if not outright free. But there's a problem that we don't have enough daycare spots,
Because we don't pay enough
and
in
that
taxes.
isn't just a problem of throwing money at the situation. That's much bigger than that.
It is too. Like, you've got to be more organized and stuff, but you also you've got to raise taxes to pay for these things, to pay for the people to make that all happen and pay the staff. Like, you can't just make it happen with the lowest taxes in Canada and the lowest taxes in the world.
And the lowest paid workers too. That's an issue, right?
No living wage. Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. And how much job satisfaction are you going to get out of something you're paid or you're compensated for? You're not really compensated properly for, right?
Yeah.
You're going to do your time and put in your hours, and it might even be all you can get. And you don't give a shit, right?
Yeah. I worked 3 jobs most of my life.
Yeah. So these are all things that I think, we got to think kind of outside of the current box, and I think abortion came into existence within the limitations of a very patriarchal society, and it was kind of a response to, like, I've got to escape this trap that I'm in. And as women, I think we got to rewrite the book and say, like, no, if majority of women are having abortions for socio-economical reasons, then we have to go after those socio-economical problems.
But most of the women, like those white women that voted for Trump, it's just, what? They apparently are fine with no birth control, no abortion, no daycare, and you're supposed to be billionaires and be able to sit at home with your kids. Like, they seem to speak for all of us.
Well, yes, and we have to tell them that's not the case. I mean, as I often tell people, like, there's a lot of pro-lifers out there that I really disagree with, that I think are completely going at things the wrong way. And the solution is not, well, therefore don't be pro-life. It's don't be one of those people.
Okay, give me an example.
You go get them.
Well, there's a lot of pro-life groups out there that are on the left side of things. Consistent Life would be one. Rehumanize International, Democrats for Life, New Wave Feminists. Like, there's a long list.
No, I mean an example of what is wrong with them. Their activism.
The right wingers.
Oh, well, like I said, just the people that just don't want daycare, the people that don't want a living wage, the people that are taking healthcare away. All of these things are counter to what I believe to be a pro-life future. Even things like war. I mean, it gets to a whole other debate. I don't know where you guys stand on war, but it seems to me that we have to kind of look at the world from a more consistent life ethic perspective, where everything makes a difference. It's not just like, okay, let's zero in on the fetus.
Yeah.
The fetus is the being that's going to be born into a society that doesn't have good education, into a society that doesn't have adequate daycare. And if that fetus is born and 10 years down the road has a health problem and lives in poverty and there's no one to take care of that child, how pro-life is that?
Your group is definitely situated to take those people on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, those people are hypocrites. I mean, they're just plain hypocrites. That's all they are.
They're concerned with the life of the child until the moment that child is born, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And so, thankfully there's a lot of groups that are kind of moving away from that and moving towards a more consistent ethic. And, so if you're against the pro-life movement because you're against the conservative mindset that's only focused on birth, then, don't worry, because there's a whole wing of the pro-life movement that exists to show otherwise, that, we can care for everybody.
Cool.
Snowberry disagrees with you. Abortion came about because women didn't want to have children. And she asked, why is that so difficult?
That was birth control. Oh my god.
Oh, that too? That came about because people.
Wow.
But the thing is, somebody doesn't want a child; they get accidentally pregnant. If they've taken all the measures to prevent that, unless you're going to demand that they not have sex.
Chunk of women who have abortion because they can't afford a child versus someone who just doesn't want a child.
That's bad. That we should fix that. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people who just simply don't want children. Why do they not have that right?
Well, they're going to work the hardest. I know many women, as soon as they hit the age to get fixed and not have children, to prevent abortion.
And I think
have lots of single friends that made sure that they got that surgery to make sure that they didn't have to ever have an abortion.
Yeah, and I think that we need to be making sure that they're allowed to get one, even if they're 20 or something, and they say, well, you might change your mind. Well, you know what? You might change your mind after you have an abortion too, but they don't seem to have a problem with that.
Yeah, stop telling these 20-year-olds they can't get that surgery. I mean, they can adopt later on if they change their mind. Come on.
Snowberry's bringing up an interesting point here about, what if you've essentially done your due diligence with birth control and it simply fails and you're just not prepared for, I have to say that my reproductive life went along exactly as planned and I never had to access that service, but still it was a comfort in the back of my mind that if I'd been in a certain situation or, even when, I had my one planned pregnancy, if there had been serious issues with, the fetus, that I could access that service. So I would hate to see it be taken away, but in my personal life, I think I would have a hard time doing it, but I would never want to take away that from somebody else, nor myself, I know that quite a few abortions are a consequence of, like was it Twyla that brought it up? Like women who have thought they have gone through menopause. And,
that was Kristine.
Okay.
I think Randy raised that as a question.
Okay, yeah. And you think you've had your 2-year track record or whatever, and all of a sudden, surprise, and you're collecting your child, support benefits and your pension at the same time. Sure, if you want to do that, but that's a little,
Well, and I think it's interesting when we talk about birth control and doing your due diligence with birth control. Something that an interesting statistic that I saw about birth control is that 54%, I believe, of women who have abortions were using contraception the month they got pregnant. And so that tells me that there's a lot of work that we have to do in that department to ensure that people are doing their due diligence. Because if it doesn't say they were using it at the time they got pregnant. It says they were using it the month they got pregnant. So if you use a condom at some point, that's my understanding of the statistic anyway, that if you use a condom at some point in the month, it doesn't mean that you used it at the time you conceived. So I feel like we need to do a lot more for sex education, to be teaching young people, don't know.
Oh dear, sorry.
Thank you. Is that like a theme song for the sex talk or? So we need to be doing more for sex education and teaching kids how to not just have one method of birth control, but if back up your backup, as I say.
Yeah.
If you're on the pill, don't just rely on the pill, because if you miss it or you take it, a little bit off at the wrong time, and you could still mess up something. So maybe you want to consider having a pill plus the condom, or a pill plus diaphragm, or condom plus something else. Like if you have more than one method, and each of those methods in and of themselves are already pretty high in terms of your odds of not conceiving. If you have two of them, it seems like it would be very, very, very unlikely that you're going to get pregnant. Not to say it won't happen, but a lot of these abortions could be eliminated just by making sure that kids and young adults or anybody really is using contraception regularly if they don't want to have a pregnancy, and that they're using them effectively and having more than one.
Yeah, and that's where you're going to get butt heads with the right-wingers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they're wrong on that.
I'm for sure, the duplication of, reproductive measures is, it just, I guess, doubles your chances of, not having an issue that you're not foreseeing, right? Still,
I was going to say also,
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, like, even if duplicate measures fail, it feels like if it were illegal, it would be a punishment on the woman, possibly the man as well, right? Like, we did our due diligence, but this still happened anyway, right? And I don't know. I think there's an unfairness about that.
And I guess, again, that's where it comes to us as a society and embracing and helping people. Like, accidents will happen. And in that circumstance, if we're ending abortion because it ends the life of a human being, then we have an obligation just to help the person who accidentally brought someone into existence, and saying, let's make sure that you've got the resources now. And if you're not prepared and you don't want to raise a child, let's ensure that, we can come alongside and help you raise this child. And I'm not talking, necessarily putting the child into foster or adopting them. I'm saying, like, even such a thing as temporary care. If you look at past societies, they were not always a nuclear family that we have today. And I think the nuclear family also causes, single parenthood like we have in Twyla's situation. Whereas there have been societies in the past that have been a lot more communal and raised children together. And so when one person was pregnant, it was kind of everybody's child. It takes a village to raise a child kind of concept. And it wasn't as isolated as it is today. So, it's something else that
a lot
you
of
can
women feel
consider.
Isolated.
Mm-hmm. So,
See, it's call me then, are you? Well, there is a communal sense about raising children, right?
It had its points, but in general, I think that we have a lot more work to do. That in the past, women have just been abandoned, and we've called names. And if you're a single parent, we've called you a whore because you had a kid out of wedlock or whatever. Like, a lot of these things can be changed and improved. And I think we have a duty to change and improve them if the unborn are human beings, and if women are human beings, and if we're all valuable as human beings, then, it takes all of us. We're all part of this society. We're all equal human beings who all have the equal right to live and to not be killed. So let's help each other. Let's not be pitting women against their kids and, poor women being abandoned, like, all this crap and all this pain that's so unnecessary. We can do so much better.
Well, you do have a point there.
Yeah, I still don't necessarily agree with you, but I'm because I think your outlook is idealistic, whereas realism might, intersect that in other ways. But I still very much appreciate what you said, and it's food for thought for everybody. I thought it was really important that you get a voice, because I know that you don't get invited to speak at conferences and that sort of thing, right? Like, I know you're tabling, and I'm proud to call Kristine my friend. Yeah. And I would like to see her, clearly she can handle disagreement, and it's about giving alternative voices a platform to share their thoughts. And I think I've really benefited from this conversation, and I hope others out there have. And I hope the phone lines open up soon, or if there's more comments, right? Randy, your phone line?
Oh, there's comments.
Yeah.
I'm sort of being selective here.
Okay, yeah. Any, no call-ins?
No, not. Anybody out there want to put out a comment that they want, or a question that they want to ask, you can type it in on Facebook or YouTube. Even better if you're phoned.
And if anybody wants to, or thinks about this after the fact, if later on, if you get this great question that you think of, like, 3:00 in the morning when this is over, or if you're watching it later after the fact, feel free to message me. I'm happy to field questions, and you can email me at ask@prolifehumanists.org. That's PORHUMANISTS.org.
PRO.
PRO.
You said, yeah.
Yeah. Pro. What did I say? Trying to spell it. Trying to spell in the air. It's like a PRO. Okay. Anyway, so prolifehumanists with an S.org.
Cool.
So you can find me on my site. There's a lot of articles on there, and you can also email me. And if you guys have great questions, I'd be I'd be happy to field them, either later on another call, another time on this podcast, or maybe
Well,
I'll do my own.
part of this is about promoting your voice. So whatever you're involved in, by all means,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure that this is relevant, but Snowberry wants to know if you've ever been pregnant.
I have not.
What
I have
was that?
not.
Have not.
I
Okay.
have not, but I have been through my best friend. She's been through several unplanned pregnancies, so I've supported her through that. And when I talk about communal supporting of unplanned pregnancies and of women in difficult situations, she was a single parent when she had several of her children that were unplanned. And for a time I was living with her, so I kind of was like there as a second parent on hand. She had older children as well at the time, and she had another baby, and I was there for the baby's birth. And I think that's just the kind of thing that we should be doing, whether if you're somebody who doesn't have kids or who wants kids and can't have them or whatever, let's just partner with each other. Let's get away from this whole nuclear mentality that it has to be only the mother and the father, and we're a big family. Let's work with each other.
Yeah, you're walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
Trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Snowberry's trying to get at the actual physical damage and pain involved in pregnancy, and
Right.
some people just don't want to go through that.
Yeah. And I guess if you're definitely sure that this is not something you want to do to your body, then that's where I would advocate and highly encourage sterilization. And I would hope that you would have the right to do that even if you're under a certain age.
Okay. I know you, and like I said, I consider you a friend, and you've got some very, I hope this isn't embarrassing or anything, but I know you advocate for masturbation, that kind of thing, and I think,
Yay! Yay!
yeah.
That's awesome.
That's obviously something that would go against the religious element that would support the pro-life position. And I just think that's,
Well,
Show us your toy drawer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's okay.
I guess,
TMI.
I guess there's other ways to pleasure people that necessarily don't necessarily involve the exchange of bodily fluids, and
sure.
I think it's very cool that you advocate for that too.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good point. Oral sex has yet to make anyone pregnant, unless you do it and then go down. Anyway,
Yeah, odd.
but it's not likely.
Odds of that are pretty slim, but yeah, suppose it's theoretically possible.
Theoretically, but yeah.
It's definitely easier to be pro-life when you're pro-masturbation, pro-birth control, pro-common sense, pro-support, etc. It goes a lot better than
I think
what
so.
Anti-abstinence.
do. Yeah.
Is what I'm getting here, right?
That's part of being an atheist pro-lifer, is that you don't have to be uptight about sex and religion, religious restraints of what a family has to look like and what sex has to look like. And
Yeah.
I wish, people talk about, you'll have we can't have consequence-free sex. What the heck is wrong with consequence-free sex? Go for it. I wish we could all have consequence-free sex.
With toys you can.
Well, and with the doubling up on the birth control, you can
Right.
do that too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't think Kristine is a prude by any stretch of the imagination here, and it's I've had so much fun with this conversation. Yeah. Not that I'm trying to terminate it or anything.
No,
like that.
I think we're winding down anyway, aren't we?
Yeah, it's been an hour and a half or so.
Right.
Oh, wow, okay. Yeah. No.
So our next podcast can be on the joys of sex toys, is it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you can have Daryl Ray on at the
Won't
same
get you
time. I'm
pregnant.
sure Daryl Ray would
There you go.
have fun with that too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kristine, for being on the Legion of Reason Diversion, and I think we hit all the points.
All right. Well, thank
And
you for
thanks for
having me.
letting us-
Except one.
What's that?
I understand, Kristine, that you and I have a friend in common, JoJo.
Ah.
Yes, and I was hoping he'd kind of call in, and I know his schedule's super busy, and I gave him kind of minute notice, but
There was a JoJo in the chat.
Did JoJo know about this?
Was
I don't
there?
think I posted my my thing on my page, but
okay.
anyway, hi JoJo.
If he's out there, is it a he or she?
JoJo's a he.
He's our Christian apologist here in Calgary, and
Yeah,
Yeah, I've debated him a couple of times, and of course, out of that has formed a friendship. And I was, he told me that, I know this atheist Kristine who's a pro-lifer. I'm like, it didn't hit me at the time because Kristine's kind of a common name, obviously, right? And I'm like, oh, I know who you're talking about. So when we, connected a little bit later, I'm like, yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. And it was really cool to find out that we have, this friendship in common.
That's funny. Yeah, Jojo and I go way back. Like, I think I was like 18 when I met him, so he's actually one of the reasons why I got into the pro-life movement in the first place, because I was kind of I was pro-life as a teenager when I first saw what a picture of what an abortion looks like, and I kind of connected with those hands and those feet, but it was more just an issue for me until I started chatting with Jojo and realized, like, no, it's something I really need to be more involved in. So yes, hi Jojo.
Yeah, and Jojo tells me that you guys argue quite vociferously on points, but you have agreement on that. So
yeah, he's
really cool.
he's still a Christian. So that's actually one thing about being a pro-life atheist is you have to spend a lot more time with Christians than you otherwise would.
Yeah. No, I just think it's cool that we have these connections, and despite our disagreements, we can still be friends and have these kinds of conversations. And thank you.
I think it's healthy. I think it's really good to have friends that you disagree with, and I wish I wish more atheists would keep Christian friends in their life, because for one thing, it's good for the Christians to be able to hear sound arguments, and it's good it's good all around that we have people that disagree with us, because
absolutely. Yeah.
I try to proselytize to you that it's kind of strains relationships.
It does get annoying. I go to a lot of pro-life conferences where they're always like, "Oh, you're an atheist. Have you heard about what about Pascal's wager? What about this?" Yeah, I've heard.
Roll eye rollers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very cool.
It's a price to pay.
Yeah, I imagine you put up with your share of what's alienation from both groups.
It's from both sides. So it's kind of as when you leave religion, a lot of people kind of feel isolated, and they come to the atheist community and they kind of get embraced. I didn't really have that, because I left religion, came to the atheist community, and they're like, "Oh, you're one of those people. You're pro-life, right?"
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit of an oddball in both camps, but thankfully there's a lot of us. Statistically speaking, if you look at Pew Research, 19% of people who identify as being non-religious identify as pro-life. So there's a lot of us out there, and maybe not as many people in the active atheist community yet. But you'll find them if you go on Twitter and you Google pro-life atheist. The people chatting kind of here, there, and everywhere in the woodwork. But we're out there, and hopefully the discussions will continue to be positive and productive for everyone.
Yeah, and I have to say that I've seen your tabling materials, and you include Christopher Hitchens on that, and I've heard him talk about that, and I don't think that's an unfair assertion of his position.
No, so he actually, you're correct. Hitchens actually, in one of his debates, somebody flat out asked him if he identified as pro-life, and at the end of his answer, he said, "So yes is my answer to that." So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Nuanced, of course, just like you.
Oh, but, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. But I think it's good for us to realize too that there's these labels of pro-life, pro-choice, and a lot of people kind of call themselves pro-choice, but then when you ask them, would you oppose abortion in this circumstance or this circumstance or this circumstance, people are a lot less, dogmatic than we think they are. So a lot of people who are pro-choice are a lot more pro-life than they realize, and sometimes vice versa.
Yeah.
We have a lot more in common, I think, than we have, in disagreement.
Yeah, because I've of course I've seen you at a few conferences and we've hung out a few times, but I've never really had to have had the opportunity to have a deep conversation with you like this. And I suspect you do. We're a lot more nuanced than, shall we say, other people. Yeah.
And I guess by nuance you just mean like supporting birth control and that kind of stuff, or
yeah. So in many ways, yeah.
So there's common ground to be had, and I think even in the atheist community, we can be pro-life and pro-choice and still come together on things to improve society. So all the humanist values that we have for addressing poverty and advancing a lot of women's rights issues that we would actually agree on. we can and we should come together on those things, even if we disagree. Rather than shooting darts across the aisle at each other, it's like, let's just work with what we have. And I'm proud to link arms with people, even if they call themselves pro-choice, just because, hey, there's a lot of work to be done. So let's do what we can.
Yeah, we're pro-choice in the fact that we're also pro-woman, enabling that them not to have abortion and yada yada. Being in a situation where you are economically viable no matter what age.
Yeah, and I still want to grant, I wouldn't want to make it illegal because I still want to grant women that right, but the way you've pulled things together in a much broader political, social context has been super interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think at the very least, even if we don't make abortion illegal, we can work to make it unthinkable and unnecessary.
Yeah.
And that would be a huge chunk of the battle right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we good?
I'm good.
I think we've got everything out.
So thank you guys very much for having me on your show.
Thank you for being on.
I look forward to it.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. All the best, and I'll be happy to do it again someday or see you at a conference.
Sure.
Thank you.
Awesome. I hope so. Okay. Bye, Kristine.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Legion of Reason Diversion, coming to you from Alberta, Canada. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to our bi-weekly podcast on iTunes and the podcast.
No, I'm just
can we talk about
to our
being on
YouTube live
YouTube?
sessions where you can join in
He's
on the
running that
discussion.
end thing of the
Thanks
weekend.
for giving us a listen. Music and other sound effects under license from audioblocks.com.